This is apropos. War-weary residents of more than a dozen towns and villages in southern Lebanon have been issued with fresh evacuation warnings from the IDF, even as Israel claims that it has no territorial ambitions in the country. Despite the recently extended ceasefire, Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah continue to engage in fierce fighting and trading blame over violations of the fragile truce. Well, with more on Lebanon's worsening humanitarian crisis, here's France 24's Monty Francis.
Waking up in a tent in Beirut, the day is just getting started for Rabbi Kreis and his family. Without showers, they bathe in plastic tubs and hand wash their clothes. Kreis and his wife fled their home in southern Lebanon with their 9 children when fighting broke out between Israel and Hezbollah in early March. Having left his job as a mechanic behind, the family is depending on donations to survive.
I feel like I'm a prisoner. My children and I are like prisoners in a room, sentenced to life imprisonment. When will relief come so that we can get out of this life sentence? No one knows. It's like a door that's locked and we can't get out.
The family is like more than 1 million other Lebanese people who have been forced to flee their homes in the past 2 months. Despite a ceasefire that came into effect on April 16th, hostilities have continued between Israel and Hezbollah, leaving many of those displaced too frightened to return to their homes in the south. And in many cases, there's nothing to go home to. In some border villages in the so-called buffer zone, Israeli airstrikes have destroyed a vast majority of the homes. Home to tens of thousands, the southern city of Tyre appears as a ghost town.
There is no one at all. Tyre is empty. In the beginning, this market was all full, but now there's nothing at all. The town is empty.
With the prospects of peace uncertain and the Israeli army issuing a new wave of evacuation orders in the south, many Lebanese families wonder if they'll ever return home.
Well, for more on the humanitarian crisis, we're joined by Tommaso Della Longa, spokesperson for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Tommaso, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. What can you tell us about what's happening on the ground in southern Lebanon, particularly, as well as the people who are still being ordered to leave their homes? Israeli demolition operations appear to be taking place there as well.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot, Sharon, for having me this evening. Well, the situation remains very delicate. I would say that we're looking at a very fragile ceasefire, as your correspondent just showed in the piece, where military operations are still going on, as we saw today. Of course, fortunately, at a different scale, but still going on. And looking at a massive displacement. I mean, 20% of the population, more than 1 million people, 1 on 5 persons in Lebanon is on the move, where shelter and access to basic food items, water, basic items are really priorities. So we're not looking only at the destruction of the armed conflict that is already immense, but we're also looking at long-term needs that are affecting a huge number of people in Lebanon.
And Tommaso, of course, a ceasefire in place currently. Has that offered any respite to people there, despite the fact that the fighting, of course, continues? Have NGOs like yourselves been able to get better access to the people who need it?
Yes, I mean, this is a very good question. Thanks for this. Of course, the respite is there, and the scale of the armed conflict is not comparable, and the ceasefire is a good news. But the reality here is that ceasefire doesn't mean first that the armed conflict is over, and second that the needs ended overnight. It's not like a magical solution. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people that are returning back to places where there is only rubble when they are allowed to go back, because as your correspondent just said, there is a so-called buffer zone where people don't have access, and even there are people who are basically blocked there and have big difficulties to access, for instance, healthcare. Today, I just heard here in Beirut some very distressing stories from a village of the south and one of the relatives of the people that are there were basically saying that they are surrounded and they don't have access to basic food items or to running water, and even more importantly, to healthcare. So the reality here is that yes, ceasefire is welcome. Everything that would bring a respite to civilians is welcome. But then we need much more, and we need international international solidarity for the Lebanese community. Just to give you a number, our emergency appeal is funded only 12.5%, which means that, we will need to continue supporting Lebanese Red Cross activities, but we need much more support.
And Tommaso, what impact has the closure of the Strait of Hormuz had, not just on humanitarian supplies getting into Lebanon, but on global supplies? How much aid is actually managing to get through to where you are in Lebanon?
Well, the good news is that even if the supply chain has been disrupted at the global level, they were prepositioning stock. The International Federation of Red Cross and Crescent is working through its national society, and Lebanese Red Cross is a very strong national society dealing with healthcare in emergencies, but also relief items and shelter. And also that we're able, actually in the next 24, 48 hours, we'll be able to import vehicles from our logistic hub from Dubai to Lebanon by land. But the bad news is that all of these cost more, and it will take much more time, because if before you were able to travel by sea or by flight, now it's much more difficult, and when it's doable, it costs way more. And this has a direct impact on the number of people that we are able to serve.
And Tommaso, it's not just the displaced who are in difficulty. Sure, it's not. Lebanon itself is facing the worst economic collapse in modern history. About 80% of people living there do so in poverty. They don't have access to proper healthcare, electricity, or even in some cases education for their children.
Indeed, absolutely. But this is why the situation is complicated, and this is why I was saying before that the ceasefire is not the end of the world. The ceasefire is not the end of all the problems. Here we are looking at a level of complexity and overlapping of crises that it's really unbelievable. We're looking at livelihoods, we're looking at education, we're looking at health. We're looking at, I would say, really at the basis of every civil society. And this is why, of course, there is a hope for peace and stability, but on the other side, the Lebanese community cannot be forgotten by the international community. This is why, of course, a humanitarian organization like the International Federation of Red Cross is doing their utmost, but here we're looking really at a teamwork of the humanitarian organization, international actors, international community, because the needs will stay very high in Lebanon, and we need to do our utmost to serve these communities.
And among those people who are displaced there are also Syrian and Palestinian refugees. How do you actually help people who've endured repeated cycles of conflict and displacement, particularly when it comes to children and their emotional well-being?
Well, this is a very good point. Of course, we, as Red Cross and Red Crescent, we are always helping people based on our independent assessment and based on needs, of course, not based on passport or citizenship. So, of course, refugees, Syrian refugees, but also in Palestinian refugees are communities that we are serving in Lebanon. In particular, the Palestinians are served by the Palestine Red Crescent in the Palestinian camps that are in Lebanon. And on the psychological side, the Lebanese Red Cross is setting up a huge operation in terms of psychological support. We know, sadly, by experience, that after every crisis, every emergencies, there are wounds that you cannot see, and they are the mental one. And it's really critical to address them since the beginning, because this is the only way to avoid long-term impact on the people. Of course, again, we're talking about emergency response, and of course, it's very important. But again, we need to look at mid and long-term support that are badly needed in Lebanon.
And speaking of long-term, you're in Beirut. What hope is there for people who are there for a lasting peace when Hezbollah has repeatedly refused to abide by the results of the current negotiations? It's not in support of that. How are people there feeling, in your view, about their longer-term prospects?
Well, I think I've been several times in my life in Lebanon. I've always been fascinated by the strength, the so-called resilience of the people in Lebanon. It's clear that people are tired, and they really would like to have a different perspective for the future. So I think that, of course, the ceasefire brought some kind of hope, and even in the most difficult and challenging situation, Lebanese are able to react. They have a strength that it's really incredible to me. But again, I think that they need something more in a very complicated situation from every international stakeholder, and an answer from the international community that will give them the message, will pass the message that they are not alone, and they will get that solidarity and that stability for the months and years to come.
Tommaso, as ever, thanks so much for being with us on the programme and for all the work that you do in those very difficult conflict zones. That's Tommaso Della Longa, spokesperson for the International Federation of the Red Cross, joining us live tonight from Beirut.